So yep, you're in the right place if you signed up for the CATApalooza. If you feel comfortable, please rename yourself to include your country. Just would like to do a couple public service announcements. We have 3 events coming up in Citizens Climate International and Citizens Climate Lobby Canada, and also in Europe, but there's no Europeans on the call, but I will announce that as well. On Thursday, April 21st is the Earth Day Citizens Forum, and there's a link to that in the chat box. If you're interested, we're going to have people from all over the world describe their experiences being citizen lobbyists in various parts of the world. Canada has a conference and lobbying days, hopefully in Ottawa, giving ourselves one more day to look at the COVID numbers. And then I think we're going to flip on the switch tomorrow to start making this happen. And lastly, there's a Citizens Climate International will be part of the CCL USA conference. And we're going to have a conference and lobbying days in June. Everyone who hasn't lobbied so far this spring, so countries outside of Canada and the USA and Australia, and Germany, and the European Union. The week of Earth Day, our colleagues in the European Union will be in Brussels lobbying, and the last week of May, our colleagues in Germany will be lobbying in Berlin. So lots going on around the world. So our solution at Citizens Climate International is people, and we thank you for being on our team. Our learning objectives tonight. We hope that by the end of tonight, you will be able to absorb our history, our culture, including our mission, values, and 5 levers of political will. You will be able to articulate the benefits of carbon pricing and border carbon adjustments, and learn how to be effective citizen lobbyists. You are part of an organization that has 145 active chapters outside the USA. And there's about almost 18,000 of us organized into 76 countries as well. I think there's now 53 countries with active chapters after today. We just onboarded the Philippines and members in Manila, and also a wonderful young man and his little gang from Swat, Pakistan. Our founder was Marshall Saunders. I wish you all could have met him. Very generous human being, philanthropist, cared deeply about the poor. And in 2006, when he saw the movie An Inconvenient Truth, a climate change movie that Al Gore won the Nobel Prize for, he changed his focus. He became very concerned about the climate crisis and the impact it would have on the poor. He gave dozens of presentations in his first year with Citizens with Climate Reality, and then realized we needed to get our politicians to change policies, because asking people to change their lifestyles, although it's a really important part of climate action, ultimately we would need profound changes in policies from our governments, and we needed people to be able to do that work. So he realized that ordinary people like me and you would have to organize, educate ourselves, give up our hopelessness, and gain the skills to be effective with our government. Our mission is we work to build the political will for a livable world by empowering citizen volunteers to have breakthroughs in exercising their personal and political power. We have 4 defined program areas at Citizens Climate International. For tonight's purposes, we are in the buckets of volunteer policy advocacy. That's what we're here for tonight, and also to learn about carbon pricing. But we also do work in civic diplomacy. We work at the G7 and the G20 and the UNFCCC COPs and the World Bank and the IMF and various other civic engagement organizations that engage with many governments. And we also have a division that works on writing brilliant information about building a resilient world. We have 7 core values. And while I talk about each of them, I want you to think, which of these core values speaks to you. Then I'm going to turn off my screen and come back to you all and ask a couple of you to share personally which core values speak to you. You can say it out loud on here, but also would hope that all of you would share in the chat as well. We have 7 core values at Citizens Climate International and Citizens Climate Lobby. Focus is our superpower. We are highly focused on a singular policy right now. It's called climate income. Now we recognize some of our volunteers have other interests, but this is what we focus on. And by focusing in on one thing, it allows us to save time because we're all volunteers. Even when I'm volunteering with Canada, I am, I can only do so many hours a month. So also focusing gives us a lot of time to do the things we want to do. We need to take time to take care of ourselves and just savor the planet and enjoy this beautiful planet. So focus is our superpower, and you actually get a lot of work done the more you focus. We have integrity. We see the bigger picture. We support many actions that are evidence-based and socially just that will cut emissions. Although we are highly focused on a singular carbon pricing policy, we are open to any policy that will reduce carbon emissions in a socially just way. And we would be supportive of that as well. Maybe not lobby for it, but we would never be against something that works. Well, we're not against anything anyways. Because we're optimistic. We know that humans are good, and we work from that principle. And by keeping optimistic, it just attracts good people to us. And you know what? People are good. Look at you. You're all here tonight on Zoom or this morning or wherever you are in the world, because I know it's morning in Japan. Here you are giving an hour and a half of your life over to the climate. And there's thousands, if not millions of people doing this sort of work. How could you not be optimistic? This problem is solvable. Yesterday's IPCC report gave us a roadmap on how we can get there. And if you go to the COPs and all that, you can, at the Conference of the Parties, you can see there is a path forward. And together, pushing forward together, we are getting there. And we just got to keep pushing. And one of the most important ways we're going to get there is bring as many people with us. Embrace diversity. Listen carefully to everyone. Make sure all needs are taken care of. And also bring people from all over the world with us. It's embracing diversity makes us so much stronger. Yes, it's more work and it requires a lot more listening and time, but it's worth it. It really is. Personal power is the energy that drives our organization. Volunteers such as yourself, bringing truth to your politicians and your community about climate change and being speaking for millions. When you do that is what is transforming the world. And here in our organization, there's a couple 100,000 people doing that. And you're part of that. And imagine there's millions of people trying to do the same outside of our organization as well. So this personal power is really transformative. At the very core of what we do is relationships. We build relationships with our politicians, with our community, within our groups, and within our organization, which is now in 76 countries around the world and growing. And oh yes, we are nonpartisan. This is a nonpartisan issue. So, I'm on a call, honey. Okay, so now my question to you is, which one of those core values spoke to you? So you can put it in the chat, and in a moment, we'll see which, we'll hope that a couple of you will share verbally. So please put in the chat which one of these values spoke to you. Nonpartisan, relationships, wonderful. Personal power. Nonpartisan. This is wonderful. Nonpartisan. Integrity and personal power. Relationships. Optimism and diversity. This is wonderful. Does anyone, I've been peeing my pants for, oh, welcome Hazel. I hear you, been there. You belong to a group that will help you with your anxiety for sure. Because we get things done and we make things happen. Optimism, optimism. This is great. I'm glad you said it out loud, Hazel. That's great. We need to laugh. We do. It's important. So does anyone want to share verbally, like here on the call, which of these core values speaks to you? Yeah, Kenzie, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think the two that particularly stick out to me are personal power and optimism, because I find as an individual, it's really easy to get overwhelmed and honestly pessimistic, especially about these climate issues. So to be able to, I guess, like be here and be around other people, like drives my own personal power and then continues to make me feel more optimistic. So I like those two together, because it really just drives me more to see as many people on this call and to, I don't know, also feel better about myself trying to make a difference in my personal life. And I think that's powerful.
Yeah, and I love how you caught the synergy between the two of them, how the personal power feeds on the optimism, which within a group kind of like snowballs and makes it so awesome. It's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyone else want to share? Go ahead, Gladys.
Hi, I really I chose relationships because I really appreciate the idea of going and having a relationship and building a relationship with my local MP, so that not every MP knows everything about the environment. They don't know most of them don't know a lot about climate change. And I hope that someday I'll become my MP's expert, so that when they do have questions, they can come back to me and ask for more detail. I think that, well, the person who mentored me in the Durham group said that. And it's like, be gentle and just build that relationship so that you're the subject matter expert to that MP. I hope I expressed that okay.
It's beautiful. And it is what eventually happens in this work. And it is beautiful. And what an honor to be a consultant to our MPs, isn't it? And they need our help. It's a very complex job. And I love that service that you're willing to give. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. Andy.
I'm especially interested in integrity. I think it's a massive lack of integrity on many levels that has brought us to this emergency. But also when I look around at my fellow climate activists, I am just filled with admiration for their character, their integrity, their honesty, and I am proud to work with them.
That's beautiful. Yeah, a lot more truth and a lot more politeness. And that brings integrity, and that's really going to help move this forward. And that's been missing. And we bring that. Somebody the other day, Rainer the other day said, lowering the temperature in civic discourse is one of our duties,
Mm-hmm.
And I love the pun too, lowering the temperature. Anyways, so whatever. Okay, all right. That was beautiful, Andy. Thank you. Anyone else? And somebody asked about my hair color. I didn't change my hair color. I stopped changing my hair color. This is my hair color. This is what I'm supposed to have.
Personal power.
Personal power, yes. And any last questions or comments? Yeah, that was fun, Jeff. Thanks. Okay, so greenhouse gas pollution is warming our planet. Which is the number one source of this pollution? It's over 80% of this is the source. It's burning one thing. What is it? Just shout it out.
Oil and gas.
Yeah, oil, gas, and coal. Yes, burning fossil fuels. The burning of fossil fuels accounts for over 80% of the greenhouse gas pollution in the last decade. So that's our target, right? Greenhouse gases, especially fossil fuels. Okay, another thing that was brought to mind to me yesterday as I was watching the IPCC deliver their report on mitigation, when they were talking about financial flows, and they said the cost of transitioning our economy in this decade is going to be in the tens of trillions of dollars. There's no government that has that sort of money. And so like, it's just going to be a huge amount of taxes. So I know it's a kind of silly question, but does anybody think Canadians or Americans or Japanese people or Mexicans or Australians want to pay a lot more taxes? Anyone? Does anyone agree or disagree? Probably not. But there's really good news about it. The good news is we don't have to fund the transition. At COP26, financial companies worth over $120 trillion in assets committed to net zero by 2050. This much money could be unleashed. Now, if you listen carefully to subsequent information about this, many who committed to this are worried they won't be able to do it because they need the government to enact financial policies to make this happen. But this could massively transform our planet if we could figure out a few policies to unleash like $130 trillion in assets from the financial community. And this was brought forth yesterday in the 6th assessment report by the IPCC, the mitigation of climate change, so cutting greenhouse gas emissions. And they found that financial flows are 3 to 6 times lower at lower levels needed by 2030 to limit warming below 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. There is sufficient global capital and liquidity to close investment gaps. But yes, we must keep in mind that in developing countries, this is going to be a little bit more of a struggle and they're going to need our help. So about a year ago, an organization found that, at least in Canada, most Canadians cannot name a single climate policy. So I have a specific question. Identify a national or a subnational policy that could rapidly cut greenhouse gas emissions in this decade in most countries in the world, especially those that are heavy fossil fuel users. It's so obvious, you're probably not going to get it right away, but you are. So name a policy that could rapidly cut greenhouse gas pollution in this decade. Just shout it out, please.
Or in the chat.
Or in the chat. Yeah, for sure. That'd be great to know. Yep. Okay, public transit would help a lot. You're right. We got to get people to use it though. Cap and trade. Yep. So I'm hearing, yeah, or just carbon pricing in general. So let's start looking at it. What are some of them? A price on greenhouse gas pollution. And there are three major ways to do that. But also New Zealand passed a law in October that regulates financial institutions to disclose climate risks. And now Canada is looking at doing the same. So these are two major policies that we could do to redirect, to rapidly cut greenhouse gas pollution in this decade. But we focus in on a price on greenhouse gas pollution. There are three ways to price carbon or price greenhouse gas pollution. One is cap and trade, or the emissions trading scheme. This is what you find in California and Quebec, in the European Union, in Mexico. Various countries around the world have this. Government puts a cap on emission, and companies that go over it have to trade with companies that have gone under it, and then they can also offset their emissions. This is a great policy if your government has the infrastructure to do this and a trust in government that they will, do it in the first place. And and if you can get into little trading blocks, you can help industry cut emissions and become more competitive as we are decarbonizing our economy. It's actually a really good idea. It just requires governments to be able to do the work to monitor it. And not all governments can do it. So that's why rolling it out globally will be very difficult. Another way to do it is through a price carbon pollution is through a carbon tax. Put a price on pollution, government takes the money and puts it into programs. This, if those programs aren't progressive, if they're regressive and they don't help people in lower and middle incomes, this could hurt the economy and hurt poor people. So how the money is recycled back into the community is highly important, and it has to be avoided to be regressive, but it can work. But a note of warning, we need to get the carbon price to well over $100 a ton by 2030. And if citizens don't really understand what's happening with that money and they see price increases in their energy and their food, they might revolt like they did in France in 2017 with the yellow vests. So what we've been proposing at Citizens Climate Lobby since 2010 is a policy called Climate Income. It's also known as carbon fee and dividend. So those of us in Canada and the USA tend to use carbon fee and dividend, and our friends in Africa and Europe and various places around the world tend to lean more towards climate income. In Canada, we actually have a version of this policy, and the official policy is called the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act, or the Backstop, or it's also called the Backstop. It's also called the fuel charge. And so what the governments do is they put an incrementally rising price on carbon pollution, give all the money back to the people, regardless of income or carbon footprint. And then to help with trade competitiveness, the government also includes border carbon adjustments. And that's it. And it works. Let me go in a little bit more detail. So generally started about $15 to $20 a ton, go up by $10 to $15 a ton over time. That predictable signal of that gradually increasing carbon price allows for investors and households to plan accordingly. So for example, I know between 2019 and 2030, my household's going to get $13,000 in rebates over that course of time. And we will plan accordingly. So we get these rebates equally, regardless of income or carbon footprint. And they're very helpful. And lastly, a little bit more complexity here is to help with keep making sure our heavy emitting industries, such as cement, steel, chemical processing, stuff like that, they remain competitive. You put a border carbon adjustment on high carbon items coming across your border. So for example, in 2023, the European Union is going to enact border carbon adjustments, and they will be up running by 2026, I believe. And any country that trades with them, that does not have an equivalent price on carbon pollution will have to pay a tariff or a fee at the border when that steel, cement, or chemical product crosses the border. I do believe they are going to make special circumstances for countries in the global south, giving them more time to catch up. This will be more for global north countries, but I need to look at that detail. I'm not a border carbon adjustment expert. So that's carbon fee and dividend. And here it is in words. Put a fee on fossil fuels at the source, mine, well, or port of entry into the economy. We generally say start at $15 a ton, CO2 equivalent, and an increase at $10 a ton annually. Return net revenues to households equally, protecting lower and middle class households. And I'll show you that data. And then put a border adjustment on goods imported from or exported to countries without an equivalent price on carbon. Yep, and Canada has something similar, but we just don't have border carbon adjustments. So at this point, before I explain a little bit more about the Canadian policy and then the benefits, I'm just wondering if there are any questions. Any questions? I explained it really well then?
Well, there's
I'd
a
like to
question
know-
in the chat.
Oh, there is a question in the chat. Okay, I keep forgetting to look in the chat. Thanks, Gladys, for being my chat monitor.
Like, what is emissions trading scheme?
Oh, what is ETS? Yeah, somebody answered it. It's a cap and trade or the emissions trading scheme. Did that answer your question, Jeff? It did. And Alba, do you have a question?
Yes, I wanted to know what CCL Canada is asking, or what are you guys working on right now? Are you guys asking for a border adjustment?
Oh, well, we put together a team that put together our lobbying asks, and we're asking our government of Canada to ask our Parliamentary Budget Office to do a study to show the household impacts of the carbon pricing policy that we currently have in the context of, because they just put out a study, but they forgot when they published it, they didn't include the positive impacts of pricing carbon, and they didn't include what would happen if we didn't have a proper climate policy in the first place. And so it's a very complicated study that they just published, basically saying that our carbon pricing policy would negatively impact all households, but they did it in the absence of climate change, basically, and the absence of carbon price, transforming our economy. So we're asking for a redo on that study. That's number one. We're asking for I'll get to that question in a minute, Dora. Okay, sorry. Also, we're asking that the government of Canada price all greenhouse gases, including volatile anesthetics in the operating room. They're not included in our greenhouse gas inventory. And that's because most countries in the world are just don't want to impact healthcare, but we've got some studies showing that replacing one of the anesthetics that has a super hard carbon footprint with another basically will not change patient outcome. And then we're just looking at tweaking what else is priced. We're asking for border carbon adjustments for sure. And still, even though our government does give us rebates, most people don't know they're getting rebates. So we're asking for public education on rebates. So yeah, we've got a little bit more work to do. Our goal now is to just make it better and then protect it a little bit more. So once you get the carbon pricing policy that you want, you have to defend it and make it better. And then I think there'll come a time when we can finally let go. And I really hope that's in the next 2 or 3 years. I can't guarantee that though. So we can move on to another policy or start shifting away from carbon pricing, because we're getting close that this may be what Canadians want, but you never know. You can lose it at any minute. Unfortunately, the other big political party in Canada, they're their base is highly against carbon pricing. And but there's not an election for 3.5 years. So that's what we're lobbying for. And is this a federal or a provincial policy? Kyle, that policy I described is the federal backstop policy, and I'll go into detail. It's for Canada. And it is a provincial policy in provinces that don't have their own carbon price. So Ontario, Manitoba, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. And I do think, and Dora asked, BC has a carbon tax, but refunds are based on income. Is this the only difference between the fee and dividend in the rest of Canada? No, there's a little bit more. The BC carbon tax is no longer revenue neutral. Some of the funds do go into the general coffers. So it's not, it does go into programs as well. The BC carbon tax has refunds, and it's based on your income tax. And I don't think higher income people get it. So higher income people don't get the rebate. And it's also based on your income tax. So it's given back slightly differently. It's based on how much income tax you pay, it's just not a lump sum payment. So yours is given also as well within the income tax forms. Starting this year, those of us in Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta will get actual dividends payments, I think through bank transfers. We'll see in July. So there's several differences. It's not revenue neutral in BC. It's embedded in the income tax. It's based on your income tax. And yeah, and that's the difference. Did that answer your question, Dora? I hope it did. Yes, great. Any other questions before I drill down into the details? Okay, and then Jess says, we should maybe have a plan for a point in time where the carbon fees continue to rise and carbon-free energy takes over revenue. Yes, yeah, you're right. That's, yeah, what, the revenue from the carbon fee will peak and fall, but people might want to consider, yes, to receive that dividend. So yes, and we need to look at carbon sequestration programs. Yeah, there's so much more we need to do. This job will be endless. We have centuries of climate policies that we're going to need to work on. So I agree. And yeah, making sure everybody always has money is important. Maybe some sort of basic income, but that's a ways down the road. Any other questions?
Carol has one in the chat there.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you. Do you think it would be more accepted if everyone received the same rebate? I just think it's easier. And I think for people who work really hard, now, I don't know, like some people might, I don't know. I'm tired. No. I'm just trying to think that through. I mean, if I had to guess, I think some people who don't really require the rebate because they're financially okay don't really want it. And probably will just give it away somehow. It's like, oh, I got this extra money. But I think there's a small proportion of people who need to see this rebate. They need to have this money. They need to know that their government is giving them money as a rebate for the taxes that they're paying. So yeah, and I think, but really I think, yeah, I think for some people it does make a difference. So, and it does increase the acceptability for sure, if I had to think that through. And we want to make sure these carbon pricing policies last over time. So we have to make them politically viable, and giving the money back, I think, to everyone is really important. Another reason for giving the same rebate though, Carol, is the administrative costs. I think it just makes it a lot cheaper for the government to just say, everybody gets this, and just gets blasted out, as opposed to have to go through some sort of complex calculation. This is a really low overhead cost. This is about as low as you can get. And I don't know how else you would do it with current technologies that we have. So it's just simple. Okay. All right. Any last questions before I talk about the Canadian carbon pricing policy and then tell you about the benefits? Right, here we go. So this is the Canadian carbon pricing policy. There's two components to it. Like I said, we do not have border carbon adjustments. Our heavy industries pay a separate price. It's kind of like cap and trade, but without a cap. And they pay a much lower carbon price compared to the consumer. And then there's a fuel consumption and heating fuel price on pollution, like it basically gets embedded into the cost of everything. We don't actually see that charge. And then we get rebates. And 90% of the fees collected are returned to households. The other 10% goes to schools, hospitals, and municipalities and universities. We know, and I'll show you, in Canada, 80% of households come out ahead. Additionally, if you don't live in a city, literally, if you live like 20 miles outside of my city, you get an extra bonus. And so do remote households. I live in Sudbury, and Canadian farms have a separate fee and rebate system for farm fuels now. I think that just started happening in January. We know that the federal carbon pricing policy, according to Environment and Climate Change Canada data, is the biggest component of the previous GHG emissions cuts that we had. This is how much it was expected to cut emissions between 2018 and 2022. And without carbon pricing, our emissions would have gone up. Another simulator found, that in 2018 that we basically can't get to decarbonization without carbon pricing. And that's just to say in the business as usual if we didn't have anything. And then this is like all the policies that the government enacted, but without carbon pricing, that's as deep as it could get if we didn't have carbon pricing. But if it included carbon pricing, this is how much it cuts it. So the take-home message here is that carbon pricing is an essential component of a cost-effective climate plan. And then, but this is without border carbon adjustments. This is with the output-based carbon pricing. If we had border carbon adjustments, we see even much deeper emissions cuts, like way deeper. And that's what we have now. No, we don't have it now, but if we had that, we get even deeper cuts. So really hoping that Canada gets border carbon adjustments and our heavy industries pay the full price, because this will start to really transform our economy. So that's why we keep pushing for border carbon adjustments. And what I love about carbon fee and dividend or climate income is that I get the money and I get to spend it any which way I wish. And I know that most low and middle income people will come out financially ahead or break even. And here's some fun data. In November 2021, in Nature, an article was published, found that it is possible to protect the poor with a carbon tax that gave out equal per capita dividends. Basically, carbon fee and dividend of the Canadian carbon pricing policy. So they did this global analysis and they found that it will be possible to meet at least the 2-degree target. So yeah, we're going to need other policies for sure, while also increasing well-being, reducing inequality, and alleviating poverty. Isn't that awesome? Like, we can reduce income inequality and the threat of climate change with one policy. That's why I love carbon fee and dividend or climate income. The data here on the left shows why. That's because the richest among us are high consumers and have huge carbon footprints. And in fact, the richest 10% consume way more carbon than the bottom 50% of earners. And this is why most people come out ahead. They consume way more carbon than average. So that's this green bar here below for the various countries around the world. USA, Canada, Great Britain, Spain, Germany, Italy. And the bottom 50 and 40% of earners consume less carbon. So that's why most people come out ahead with a carbon fee and dividend system. And we actually have data here in Canada showing this. And even in 2022, the highest income quintile right here will only pay $200 a year more in carbon taxes than what they actually paid in their gas and their oil and their home heating. That's literally, they're paying the equivalent of one fancy cup of coffee a week at Starbucks. And they make over $200,000 a year. And they're only paying $200 more in carbon taxes this year to help secure a livable world. And if they cut their carbon, it wouldn't be that way. I'm going to let that go. And literally, climate income is the single most powerful tool we have to get to net zero by 2050. I could go on and on and on about all that supports it. There's like 28 Nobel Prize economists. There's thousands of economists in the USA and thousands of economists in the European Union. It is really a powerful tool to cut emissions. There's nothing like it. So there's this great place. You can go play with all the different climate solutions. It's called On Roads, and it's produced, or Climate Interactive, and it's through MIT Management and Climate Interactive. And my dear friend Jorge, who's on this call tonight, made this for me. He showed me that if we remove fossil fuel subsidies, subsidize clean energy, maximize tree growth and carbon pricing, we looked at each of these individually on the global primary sources of energy, air pollution, and global temperatures, what that impact would be if we maximize them. And we looked at it. So here is a baseline scenario. This first panel here is the primary sources of energy: coal, oil, gas, renewables, bioenergy, nuclear. As well, we looked at air pollution over here. So the PM just means particle size. And these particulates are very dangerous to the lungs of children. And they're very dangerous to us as we age. They bring up, maybe bringing on early Alzheimer's in people. They're very hard on the body. And so we want to get them out of the air. They're often associated with CO2 pollution because they come from burning fossil fuels. And lastly, why we want to look at that is because poor people tend to live closer to these sources of really bad pollution, like near highways or near coal-fired power plants or near fossil fuel refineries. And it's really bad chemicals in the air as a result, and it's hurting their health. And this is global temperature. So you can play with these toggles and you can see what happens. And here's what happens. So when we removed all the fossil fuel subsidies, saw a tiny increase in air quality, but pretty much nothing else changed. So removing all direct fossil fuel subsidies that the government gives barely to companies around the world would barely change anything. That's not to say we shouldn't do it. It's really ridiculous that we're funding our extinction and that money could be better spent elsewhere. But if your goal is to cut emissions, yeah, I mean, it is important to remove subsidies, but if your goal is to cut emissions and you only have time to focus on one policy, then perhaps look elsewhere, although this is important. Yeah, I won't go into detail, and you can tell I'm getting a little tired. Okay, second, is there a question? Okay, you can also maximize clean energy subsidies. This would clean the air a little bit, bring down the temperature a little bit. But imagine governments investing all this money will only change this much the world. This part, and this is important to do, especially we're going to have to get clean energy to communities to help them clean their air and stuff like that. Like it is, again, an important policy. Both of these are important policies. But if you're going after cutting emissions and bringing down the temperature, let's see what other policies will do. Maximizing tree growth will shave about 0.2 degrees off the planet. Again, very important for adaptation, biodiversity, stuff like that. And certainly these are all necessary policies, but again, it only takes a little bit off the planetary temperatures and does very little.
Good. How long?
Is there something somebody needs to say? Okay. and
Oh, I'm
last-
unmuted. Sorry about that.
Okay, cool. Okay, and then lastly, maximizing carbon pricing. Obviously, carbon pricing can't do it alone, but it really cleans the air, brings down the temperature, and as well, if you do it through climate income, you can also reduce income inequality, which is in on this graph. So this is just some of the proof, the much proof that pricing pollution will really reduce greenhouse gases. So I'm wondering if there are any questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Any questions, comments? McAllister, please.
Yeah, just even with the carbon pricing there, it says there's a temperature increase of 2.6 degrees.
Mhm.
And that's still like above the dangerous levels as outlined in the IPCC.
Mhm.
So it's yeah.
Yeah, we need other
I-
policies.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can't do it alone, but does a big cut.
Okay. Do you have any worries about the incentivization of exporting these costs overseas with a carbon trading scheme?
You lost me with your accent. I'm sorry, I didn't
Oh,
quite get the
sorry.
words. It's okay. It's probably
Um,
I'm a little tired too. I'm usually good with Australian accents. My grandfather was Australian, so please go again.
Yeah, just with the carbon trading scheme,
Oh, yes.
or you mentioned that there's with the border costing or whatever, but there's like inherent inbuilt advantages or incentives for companies to move the costly production factors that like pollute overseas into countries that don't have a carbon scheme. So like, is there concern about this?
Yeah, well, I think there have been, there is concern. That's why I'm not the biggest fan of like a cap and trade system, especially seeing how that can be, gamed. But if we have border carbon adjustments and we have standards that must be met, and they must, I think we can really make sure that doesn't happen. There is developing within the it's not within the UN, but it was coming out of the conference of the parties. There's a voluntary there are monitoring systems. So there's going to need to be monitoring systems. But if countries have domestic carbon pricing and they can show that their own emissions are decreasing, then that is great. But you're right, there is a lot of worry about like carbon being pushed around the planet and into countries where it'll just, we'll still be burning carbon. So yeah, we have to keep working on that. So this policy works a lot on domestic policies, and hopefully by countries leading by example and getting on that train to a low carbon future, and thus becoming the deciders of their own fates and not waiting for, so transforming our economy ahead of everybody else. This will keep pushing it forward. There's this whole wonderful thing, McAllister, about policy induced innovation. Once there are starts to be these really clear signals to investors and in finance people about, if they put their money here, this will, this will start, and they won't have to worry about unfair advantages of polluters. This will really start to transform the economy. So it's a race. And lastly, as a note of hope, I was in a session at COP26 with it's a climate group for finance ministers across the planet. And so they meet to talk about climate policies in the context of finance ministries, or the ministries that are responsible for money in our countries. I don't know what you call it in various other parts of the world, but it was called the Climate Group for Finance Ministers. And an economist said, progress on climate policy will not be linear. So there's going to come a point in time when a switch is going to be turned on, and investments and the economy will really start to shift, and we'll see things happen. So yeah, people can game the system for sure, but if your country is doing that, they're only putting you behind. So we got to keep bringing good information to our governments. Skeptical about what to show. Okay, I'm going to start reading a little bit in the chat over here. I think there's a conversation going. Okay. Oh, that's a good question. Okay, can anyone recommend any links to share with people who are skeptical about the carbon tax and perhaps misunderstood anything about it? Anything? Oh, that's a, yeah. I have, most I've heard people think it costs them money and does nothing, lining pockets. You know, those are really good comments to make, Elias, because that is out there in the zeitgeist. But there is tons of information. I think I'll just take a moment and I'm going to give you a link to something, but I have to go get it. So just bear with me.
Could I say something while you're searching?
Yeah, sure. Please do.
I read this book, Saving Us by Katharine Hayhoe, and she gives you some really good ways to talk to people who are skeptical. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
I would have a different response. I would actually, and this is something that they teach you at the En-ROOTS workshop, and I think it's part of the CCL way, which is a thing that I love, to acknowledge the other people's concerns. And, you know, there is some concerns to be had when talking about carbon pricing or climate income. As you said, people, especially if they live in places where the government is not very trustworthy, as is my case in Mexico, people do have that concern, you know, that they're just going to line their pockets. And I think you have to acknowledge that. And my response to that is, we have to be very careful about how we design the carbon price and how we implement it. And that's why I like the CCL solution, which is that all the money that you collect from the carbon tax goes back to the people.
That's a great answer. Anybody else want to add? It was a great question too, because we do hear that question. Okay, I'm going to put something in the chat and just show you something briefly. At Citizens Climate Lobby Canada, we're in the final stages of getting ready to lobby. And we put together a book lit twice a year to update people about the information about climate change in very short talking points that are highly cited. And I've just put it in the chat. And you can actually, you know, learn about all sorts of things like carbon pricing around the world. You can see that, you know, that where it is all around the world. You can see an executive summary. So there's lots of great data here. And my former MP, member of parliament or federal politician, was a lawyer. And I brought that Laser Talk booklet with me to him with the first time I lobbied him with our group way back in 2016. And he asked me a whole bunch of questions. And even though I do this all the time, I still like have to refer to the more complex questions. And I kept referring to this booklet. And at the end of the lobbying session, he asked me for the booklet and it became his touchstone document. So it's a good document. It'll help you with understanding all the proof there is for carbon pricing, all the things going on around the world. So Elias, great question, and I hope it was answered. Was it answered okay? Okay, wonderful. I love curiosity and I love debate. It's wonderful. Anyone else have a question before I continue? Is it in Spanish? You can take it, Alba, and make it your own. It might be a little Canadian. So we've taken American laser talks and we've done what we call Canadianize them. So now you're going to have to Mexicanize them and Spanishize them. Okay, but you are more than welcome to take those and translate them and make them useful to the Mexican context. And if you ever want to share them back, that would be lovely, because we have lots of friends in Latin America who could probably really use them as well. So we're entering the last bits very quickly. I'm not going to go into the details of all the ways in which we work. I just want you to know that there's more training. Tonight's training is focusing on carbon pricing and preparing to lobby. But we do other things. We could teach you how to write letters to the editor, work with your media. We could teach you things about working with grass tops, how to build, how to pull all these together to build a great group, learning how to think of your activism in these like various 5 buckets of working with media, lobbying, working with community leaders, working with your community, and then developing your group. We do offer such workshops. We have monthly actions, try to meet regularly. We do meet every month in Canada and in the USA. And we give an action or two, and then we practice what are called laser talks. And I showed you I gave you that whole booklet. Usually get 1 or 2, but this month they're getting about 40 because they're lobbying next month. And so a lot of this month will be reading if they wish. And this is a typical laser talk. This is, the carbon fee and dividend one I showed you earlier. And we're working on the 5 levers of political will. We're not experts. We're citizens lobbying for the, I should say, greater good. How does this give you confidence to go, or does it give you confidence to go lobby your politicians? Like, what does it make you feel? I want to just get some feedback from some of you. Knowing that you don't have to be an expert, that you're just a citizen, what perspective does it give you? Yeah, it's brave to admit you don't know everything. It gives me confidence. Yeah, you don't need to know everything. That's for sure. Yeah, just relieved. Yep. I hope it makes, yep. What do you think the politician's perception is of you as a citizen versus an expert? If I may, I'll share a story that might help bring that into focus. We had the opportunity to lobby the office of a very high level politician in the European Union 2 weeks ago. And it was a wonderful meeting, and he was really giving us lots of information. And at one point he said to us, because I don't usually give this much help to lobbyists. Yeah, there you go, Andy. Anyways, but you're lobbying for the, for the greater good. So I'm going to give you this information. And he gave us tons of information. And Andy just said it. I think and hope that politicians perceive us as people without vested interests. Yeah, you're there for the greater good, and you will be treated differently. And it's a wonderful feeling. So the first thing you do before you lobby is research the politician first. Get to know the politician. You search their websites, their social media, and government websites as well. There's you can look at, what they've said in your various government houses as well. That's often on the record, and you can see what they're saying. Be sure to also include contact information and the names of the politician's staffers. And then, share it with your team before you go lobby. And then when you get the appointment, you phone and then email, and if need be, leave a voicemail and follow it up with an email. If you are a constituent, be sure to identify yourself as one, and that means if you are somebody who lives in that district of your politician, and you should be telling that. And then lastly, be sure you mention you are with whatever you call your group and citizens in your country. So some countries call it Citizens Climate International, others call it Citizens Climate Lobby. And then one thing we like to do that's really important is motivational interviewing, like questions. So you get that appointment and you want to talk with your politician, not to your politician. You want to communicate with them about carbon pricing. And to do that, we teach you and to start thinking about asking questions. So this is a person-centered interviewing style for eliciting behavioral change by helping people to explore, find common ground, and overcome obstacles and move forward together. And we want to, so the first thing you do is you get that lobbying appointment. So you've got permission to start this topic about carbon pricing because you've already asked if you could have an appointment. And then you then ask the politician how, who, what, when, or where questions and avoid why. And the whole point is to get the other person talking. The politician should be doing most of the talking. So, for example, once you do your introductions and, introduce the carbon pricing policy, you start asking questions. And so you say, like, who do you think you could work with? And what are your thoughts about this policy? And when would be a good time to meet again? Or where should we send this information? Or how do you think the committee would feel about this? You ask these sorts of questions, and this gets the conversation going. So we're going to role play a lobby meeting, and I'm going to need someone to be the lobby lead, another person to say something nice about a politician, and I need someone to ask for the time. Usually we have a note taker, but we don't need one tonight. We need a couple people to participate in the discussion. And then we need somebody to ask specifically about, the carbon pricing policy, like to start asking the politician right out of the bat, what are their thoughts about this carbon pricing policy? So somebody who can really talk about carbon fee and dividend or climate income. I will be the politician, but I need somebody to lead. Has anyone here lobbied before and would be comfortable to help lead the session? Like, who would like to do that? It's going to give you a little bit more context. We're going to meet. You're going to pretend I'm the politician. You're going to ask how much time we have and get to know each other. Somebody's going to state an appreciation, and then somebody's going to state the ask. And then we're going to ask a couple questions, and we won't have time to get to the end. But this is what happens usually in a meeting. Yep, we got to hold on to democracy. And you know how you do that? You get really super polite.
Yeah.
The politer you are, the harder it is for them to find fault in you. It's wonderful. It's a powerful tool. Okay.
Can I ask what the politician's name is?
Oh, that's an excellent question. We need to know the name of who we are going to talk to, right?
It's you, right, Kathy?
Yeah, but we're pretending I'm somebody.
Oh,
Even though I have a
you
great
are
Mexican
somebody.
name, like, yeah, I know, I'm pretending I'm a Mexican politician, and I have a great last name to almost come across as a Mexican. Very first time I ever went to Mexico, my bus driver's name, his last name was Orlando. I was like blown away. It was like my very first 5 minutes talking to somebody from Mexico in Mexico. His last name was the same as mine. So I could pass for a Mexican. Okay. All right. Yes. It used to be that the Republicans like Teddy Roosevelt were the conservationists. I love Teddy Roosevelt, but okay, let's keep going. I'm being sidetracked here. Okay. So what's my name, Alba?
Your name will be Catalina Orlando.
All right, Katarina Orlando. I love it.
But
Okay,
we'll call you Miss Orlando.
okay. All right, beautiful.
Miss or Ms?
Sorry, my Mexican ears don't know the difference.
Senora.
Senora, sí.
Senora.
Senora. Yeah, okay, we'll do senora. All right. All right, and then, all right, 2 questions. Anyone? What would
How do you
you
feel about climate change?
Oh, that's a very good place to start. Okay. That's a really good place to start if you don't know a politician. We'll start there. Okay. And another question, maybe more about carbon pricing or, but that's a good starting question. One more?
You ask if they know about the benefits of carbon pricing.
Yeah, so you don't want to make them think like they might not know something. So you might want to say, what sort of questions may you have about this policy? So then it makes them feel like a little bit more open to ask the question as opposed to pushing them into corners like, you know this? Like, I've accidentally done that myself to a politician I love, and he called me out on it. Like, it was terrible. It was about border carbon adjustments. And afterwards, I'm like, I am so sorry. So yeah, you got to be very careful how you word those questions. But it was a good question, McAllister. Just so maybe just reframe it a bit. Like, do you have any questions about this policy, or would you like to know more about the benefits? Those sorts of questions.
Okay.
Okay, cool. McAllister, you're asking that. And Alba, you're going to ask about my thoughts about climate change in general. Are we ready? Senora Orlando wants to meet with you. Go ahead, Andy. The timekeeper is Gladys. The appreciator is Alba. The explaining carbon fee and dividend is Virginia. Alba's going to ask the question about just climate change in general. And McAllister is going to ask a little bit more about my thoughts about the carbon pricing policy. Is that
Okay,
all right? Okay.
thank
So
you.
you're welcome. So
And
you just
what
make sure the agenda moves. So go ahead.
Okay. Okay, and sorry, did we say who was a note taker?
Now, we're not going to take notes tonight.
Okay.
We're going to just let that one go. So we're just
Okay.
going to role play the first 2 minutes of a meeting.
Okay, all right, very good.
Okay.
Buenos dias, Senora Orlando. Thank you so much for meeting with us today. We work with Citizens Climate Lobby, or Citizens Climate International, and we would be very pleased to have a discussion with you about carbon pricing. I'd like to briefly introduce the members of our team before we open up the discussion. Senora Alba Peña will be contributing to the conversation, as well as Virginia and Glady, and Glady will be keeping time in particular to make sure that we keep the meeting to our agreed upon time and finish on time. And McAllister will also be joining our conversation. So with that said, I'd like to call on Alba to open up the discussion.
Thank you very much.
May I ask first, how much time do we have?
15 minutes. That's okay.
Thank you, Senora. Thank you.
Question.
Thank you for reminding us of the time. And thank you very much, Ms. Senora Orlando, for seeing us and giving us your precious time. We know you're very busy, and we really appreciate everything that you are doing for our country and our environment.
Oh, thank you. And I really appreciate meeting with citizens who take the time to bring good information to us and are doing things for the greater good. You know, at this time of global crises converging, we need help from citizens as such as yourself more than ever. So thank you for your time and energy you're giving me today.
Very good. Virginia, you're pretty well versed on our policy. Would you like to give Senora Orlando an overview of Citizen Climate
Sure.
Lobby?
Happy to. Yes, really nice to meet you, and happy to have this opportunity to chat a bit. Carbon pricing is one of those ideas that you may have heard of before. Some countries have implemented it or have other words for it, climate income or climate fee and dividend. It's a way of gathering, putting a price on the pollution that's created by burning fossil fuels that are warming our planet, so that we can gather that income and then give it back to the people so they can choose to change their lifestyles and improve what we're doing to our planet.
Okay. Well, that sounds like an interesting policy. Thank you for informing me about it.
McAllister, do you have anything to add? Anything you'd like to?
Yeah, sure. It's lovely to meet you, Senor Orlando. Do you have any questions about the carbon pricing and dividend scheme that you would like us to answer?
Okay, well, first, as a conservative, I would just like to say that that sounds like a conservative-like policy. So I really appreciate you bringing it to me here today. It seems like it doesn't grow government, but I need to know more details, like, is it fiscally sound? Does it really work? Where does it work? Do you have any evidence that supports it? And lastly, and most importantly, is any country have this policy? Because, and how is it going in those countries? Are they getting yellow vest protests like they did in France 5 years ago, or is it okay? So I guess, first of all, where has this worked in the world? Has any country ever done this before?
Virginia, would you like to take on this question?
Sure. Yeah, here in Canada, we have started implementing this, and there's evidence that comes from multiple places. Recently, there was an article actually in Nature magazine or Nature Research that showed that it actually allows most people to come out ahead, and it allows us to implement a socially just transition away from energy from fossil fuels. In terms of other evidence, there are a couple of other places you can go, like En-ROADS, which shows how carbon pricing is one of the most effective, not the only one, but one of the most effective ways of reducing our greenhouse gases. And there are other countries that are talking about this and discovering it as well. And we can certainly share more information with you if you like.
Yeah.
I know. Could I jump in? Because Australia
Please.
literally has done it before.
Indeed.
And in Australia, we've seen during the time that the carbon pricing was implemented, there was a steep decrease in carbon emissions during that time. Unfortunately, because of misinformation and pushback from the opposing government of the time and a large-led campaign against it, it got repealed, and it saw an immediate uptick after the repeal of the carbon pricing scheme in carbon emissions. So it's been shown that the carbon pricing scheme does have beneficial works and does in fact work when it is implemented in the first place.
Well, I'd love to see the Australian and Canadian data. Are there any other questions?
Well, Senor Orlando, I might jump in for just a moment. I'm curious to know if this topic is under discussion at all in your caucus.
Well, in Mexico, we do have a cap and trade system, but the price is very low, and revenue recycling is something that we need to look at and make sure that, especially with any sort of carbon pricing policy that we have, that that there is political stability resulting afterwards.
You are so right, Ms. Orlando. I do share that concern with you. And one of the things that I think makes climate income so great is that it's so predictable. And we know how much pollution is going to cost the companies who pollute, and we also know how much people are going to get as a rebate thanks to that climate income. So it's really predictable, and I think it would be great for the economy.
Well, I could do this all night. I'm loving being a politician. And you're all asking great questions. And I love hearing my name, Senora Rolando. I love it. It sounds so good. That was so much fun. Okay, so I hope this experience, this is basically what lobbying's like. You know, you do a lot more homework about the politician, and you really think about your questions, and you really think about, you know, what next level you want to get them to. But what is the number one goal of your very first meeting with a politician? Does anybody remember, or what do you think it should be?
Getting to know them and them getting to know you.
Yes, getting to know them and getting to know you. So you can
And
have that. Go
listen
ahead.
to them. Listen to them.
Listen to them. Yeah, listening.
Make friends.
Make friends. So yeah, exactly.
Meet again. Have a
Meet
second
again. Yes, meet again. Relationship building. We got it. We got it. They're our friends. And I'll close with Gandhi. I mean, when he met with General Schmutt, who was the South African army guy that was going to jail him again for, you know, all the protests he was doing in South Africa. General Schmutt, you know, asked him, so what do you expect to achieve? And Gandhi said, I expect to prevail. And he said, how? General Schmutt back to Gandhi, and Gandhi said, with your help. I love the smiles. We're
On the same
done.
Thank you.
That was great. That's it. That's all. So welcome. And thank you everyone for being here tonight. I hope you have fun lobbying. Dora, I'd love to talk to you by the end. And Alba, thank you for your contributions. And everyone, thank you. Gladys, everyone, Andy, McAllister, everyone, thank you so much. I hope you get in contact with your local leaders to make sure that you are, you know, lobbying this session. I know it's going to be a little bit complicated in Australia because you have an election in May. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Yes. So yes, thank you. Thank you, McAllister. Yes. Good night. Buenas noches. Right? Good night.
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank
Bye.
you.
No, thank you.
Ciao. Thank you.
Ciao.
That was beautiful. Wonderful session.